On Friday, March 12th, right around 6 p.m., I was going home from the store, and when I began to turn off the highway, I noticed something was waiting down on the side of the highway, near the creek, about 40 yards ahead of me. So at that time, instead of turning, I went on toward it to see what and if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. As I got within about 10 yards of it stood straight up, turned around slowly, and walked into the woods really calm. At the time, I couldn't believe what I just saw. The thing was very large, dirty white, taller than the street sign that was near, and furry. I could tell it was not human or anything I'd ever seen before. It scared me so bad that I had tears in my eyes and began shaking at the time. Then, I went straight home and told my husband about it. My sister-in-law actually had seen something white stand up from behind the dog pen that was also whitish, looking back in the 90s. My husband's cousin seen something black squat down behind a tree, about 3 miles through the woods from where I seen my sighting, and there are also old tales that my husband has told me about something that people said used to live in the old mines, that is now a hunting club, that was whitish looking, and looked about 7 to 8 feet tall. They called it Bozo, and he has heard several other people talk about seeing something similar within this area. Back in 1990, I was having predation problems on some property I was leasing at the time. Something was killing and eating my chickens that I was raising. So, me and my friend BJ decided to do a little varmint hunting. We set up in some tall sage grass in the field behind my home, about 300 meters away. It was late evening, and we got into position to do some calling with a fawn distress call that I had brought along with me. We called on and off for several minutes, no results. So, we decided to wait until just before dark to try again. We got to sitting there, just listening. Noticed something was walking just inside the woodline, directly in front of us, maybe 150 meters away. It had the rhythm of something bipedal, not four-legged. We were upwind, so I waited to see what or who it was. It got so dark that couldn't see more than 25 to 30 meters, so we decided to call it quits for the day. When we got up, BJ shined his 6-cell light at the woodline, and we caught a glimpse of something stepping back, and stopped looking back where it had came. About then, we hears the same series of sounds, and the deer, rather than go back within 20 feet of us in the opposite direction. Over the next few months, there were no more sounds, so we put it in the back of our minds and forgot about it. Deer season came, and we decided not to hunt the area alone, but to go ahead, and the same stench as that night, months before, and the closer we got to the place where the deer had been, it got worse. Upon arriving, the deer was gone. You could see it where it had lain, but it was nowhere to be found. There were no drag marks in the leaves, so whatever had moved it had actually lifted it from the ground and carried it. There are no known predators here larger than coyotes or bobcats. The deer weighed around 100 to 125 pounds, so whatever it was large. This all occurred 1.5 miles southeast of Alabama, on a property owned by Mr. Gregg. This happened in 1988 in Nauvoo, Alabama. I was 14 at the time. I was at home in my living room watching TV, and my brother outside working on a car. We were the only ones at home. The front door was located in the living room. We never used this door because we had no steps to it, and the door was about 4 feet from the ground, so we used the back door of the house. I was sitting on the couch, watching TV, when the door began to move, and the doorknob was turning. The only thing holding the door shut was a nail. Someone had nailed at the top of the wall and bent it over to hold the door shut. I first thought it was my brother, but he knew we didn't use the door. As the door was moving, just a little, I noticed at the bottom of the door, where there was a gap, 3 fingers slide under the door. My heart began to beat faster. I tried to move, but I couldn't at first. Then, I wanted so bad to look out the window beside the door, but I was too scared. These fingers were very long, and the nails too were long and black. The hand-like finger had hair on it that was dark brown. The hair was also long. This only lasted for 3 minutes. When the fingers moved out from the gap, the doorknob and both the doors stopped moving. About 45 minutes later, my brother came inside, and I asked him why he was trying to use the front door, but he said he hadn't. I didn't tell him what happened until sometime later. Because of fear, he wouldn't believe me, and the fear of him using this to scare me later on. I was canoeing on the Sipsey River here in Alabama. It was dusk as I was pulling out of the river, and I was trying to hurry, getting all my gear in the car before it got dark, as it was about a 60-yard walk up this steep hill to where my car was. Just as I was flipping the canoe up to put on my shoulders, I heard this very loud whoop, whoop, whoop. Then a pause, followed by 3 more whoops. I've been in the woods enough to know that it was not an owl, or like any sound that I've ever heard of, come to think of it. Too loud and far too powerful. It felt like it came from about 1/4 to a half-mile away. It scared me. You've never seen a guy hustle a 75-pound canoe on their shoulders and practically run up the hill. I didn't even tie it up on the property until I got up to the highway. The weird part was, I had been watching the Monster Quest series, and the month before had come down to the same river, and thought, this area looks just like the stuff they used to show in the Pacific Northwest, where those Bigfoots are. Wonder if there were ever any Bigfoots in Alabama. So I did an internet search, and it surprised me to find out that the whole website is about Alabama Bigfoots. Those sounds I had heard sounded just like the whoops you have on the BFRO. Of course, after watching those shows, it could have been somebody doing that call, but I'd emailed the Alabama research people. They said they did not have anybody working that area at the time. And this was in August of 2010. Over the last year, I have had a few unusual moments in this area. No sightings, but, well, I'm short on time. The whoops were the important thing. Scared me to death. I live in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, in the Yellow Creek community. My husband and I heard screams in the woods from some kind of animal that is so loud, and it has a long guttural yell that sounds like a man. We have never heard anything like this. This has been going on now for 3 weeks in March of 2012. Almost every night, just about 8:30 p.m., or right before it getting dark. Then it stops for about a month, and now it has started back up again. I have lived in the country all my life, and I am 52. My husband is 66 years old. We're not a bunch of kids making these things up. I know what cougars, coyotes, bears, and wolves all sound like. We have never heard anything like this in the woods before, other than 14 years ago. My son, who is in the Army, and still is to this day, he and I were sitting outside one night, right around 11 p.m., just talking. We heard the same thing yell out then. It came from behind my house, and it yells out in that long guttural yell 3 times, And after the third time, it sounded like there was 50 or more coyotes were surrounding us, and they started yapping like crazy. The recent sounds are coming between my grandfather's old house and my home. It's about a half-mile away. We have a huge lake behind us and nothing but woods. My grandfather has some old abandoned gravel pits and lakes close by too. There is a swamp in front of our home, about a quarter-mile away. I was also told that when I was a child, back in the 1930s, my grandfather went to the gravel pit one night. He saw something sitting on the hill that looked like a huge hairy thing that had a face, just like a man. This, though, was before all the media hype from the Patterson films. I need help, because this thing is getting closer to our home. My husband doesn't have good hearing, and he said he could hear it upstairs one night. It sounded like it was in the yard. We have animals, cattle and donkeys here. We don't know whether to shoot at the sounds from where it is coming from, or what. On March 31st, 2012, it sounded like it was right down at the bottom of the holler, right past our fence. It sounded like two of whatever this thing is was mad and was yelling at us. I got so scared I took off running into the house. I've never been so frightened in my life. And believe me, when I say go outside a lot at night by myself, I really do. We have a huge wraparound porch, and I love to listen to the owls in the whirlpool at night. But nothing like this has ever happened to me before. Last week, I went to put my puppy up for the night in our garage. Then I heard whatever this thing is let out a scream. I called for my husband to come home, and it was back. When he got here, we heard it growl. It came from the same area as before. Like I said, before we heard it just about every other night for 3.5 weeks. Then nothing. That night I told my husband, he's back. Then the next night, we heard it again. But this time, down in front of our house, down at the swamp. For the past 2 years, people have cut thousands of acreage of land all around here, and a lot of animals have now migrated around here. My father did not have his timber cut, and he has a large amount of land, and we live in the middle of it. We have no one who lives by us. So I emailed you in March. As you know, when you start talking about something they have never seen or heard, everybody thinks you're crazy. My husband and some others were preparing a field for planting when he noticed a pile of fecal matter in the field. He walked over to it and stated that he wondered what might have made such a large pile. As he looked around for horse or cow tracks, another person walked over to it and said, "Look at the size of those footprints." They all began looking around and found tracks coming out of a grassy area onto a nearby dirt road. The tracks went about 20 feet, then turned sharply left into the freshly plowed field, plowed the day before. They proceeded about 30 feet into the field. There, you could tell where it paused to squat, repositioning its feet to do so, and did its business. While in this position, it dug up some turtle eggs in front of it and ate them, leaving broken shells behind. The feces were the consistency of horse droppings, and the way they were high fiber content, contained undigested, a kind of wild grape. But the droppings weren't in the shape of a horse manure, round ball-shaped piles. They were long and cylindrical, like that of a dog or a human. The feces were about 18 to 24 inches long, and about 2 to 2.5 inches across. Rather large. The tracks then turned left again into an area of tall grass, small pines and other small trees that lined a field at the edge of the woods. I was not able to follow them very far due to dead branches, briars, and undergrowth that blocked my progress. Plus, I was wearing only sandals, shorts, and a tank top, not prepared to trek through the woods. I took pictures of the tracks and the feces with a yardstick for size comparison. I also took a specimen of the feces and turtle eggshells, which are still in my freezer. I have a cast of a left and right foot. The right one broke trying to pick it up, but is still in pretty good shape. The left one is completely intact. They measure approximately 18 inches long, 8 inches wide at the toes, and 4.5 inches at the heels. The stride measured 3 feet from toe of 1 foot to the heel of the next step. Each foot is 5 toes. A human-like large toe on the inside of the step, and each toe following being smaller than the last. There is an arch to both, showing it is not flat-footed. I took these samples to the University of Alabama and showed them to a professor who's an anthropology professor in forensics. I walked away disappointed to hear him insist that what I had were bear tracks. But he had been on a bear trip since I had spoken to him a few days prior about my finding. When I arrived at his office, before he even looked at the cast, he was talking bears and showing me books and pictures of bears and bear tracks. I tried to say bears don't have a big toe, but he tried to make up reasons that these tracks of a bear had a big toe. I realized this person was not going to believe what he was looking at. It either frightened him to think it was a possible Bigfoot out there, or he was embarrassed to say he didn't know what it was. Just a bear. Well, there's our encounter of a track sighting. And here's something else. My daughter used to drive through the area as a shortcut, but after seeing a very large figure on the side of the road at around 3 in the morning, now she goes the long way around after dark. She described it as being a hairy creature on 2 legs, in an upright stance, around 10 feet tall. She did not reveal this info until after the tracks were found, for fear that people would think she was crazy. Then, I read several sighting reports, and one dating back to 1999. I'm still bummed out that it was in the same general area. Freaky. And then, since the sighting of a man who lives in the area also claimed that something big picked up his chicken pen and carried it around 40 yards into the woods, and all of his chickens are gone. A man who grew up in this area stated he saw it as a child, but nobody would believe him back then.